Imagine waking up tomorrow and every piece of music on earth has vanished. No songs on your phone, no national anthem before a sporting event, no lullabies to calm a crying baby, no birthday song, no wedding music, no movie soundtrack telling you when to laugh, cry, or hold your breath. Even birds still sing, but somehow humans never learned how. Life would still go on. Cities would still buzz. Cars would still drive. People would still talk. But something invisible would be missing. The world would feel strangely empty. Because music isn't just something we hear, it's something we live inside. Think about your own life. Almost every important memory probably has a soundtrack, a song that reminds you of someone you loved, music playing during your first dance, the melody that instantly transports you back to childhood before you've even realized why. And yet, none of that should exist. Because music doesn't seem necessary for survival. You don't need a song to find food. You don't need rhythm to build a shelter. You don't need a melody to escape a predator. Evolution is usually ruthless. Anything that wastes time, energy, or resources tends to disappear, which makes one discovery almost impossible to explain. Imagine standing beside an Ice Age campfire 40,000 years ago. The wind cuts through your clothes. Tomorrow, you still have to hunt. Your family depends on every successful hunt. Every hour matters. Every piece of wood matters. Every bit of energy matters. And yet, someone isn't sharpening another spear. They aren't repairing tools. They aren't preparing food. Instead, they're carefully carving tiny holes into a fragile bird bone, hour after hour, not to make a weapon, to make music. Why? Boredom can't explain it. Boredom is a luxury. Ancient humans rarely had the luxury of wasting precious time. So perhaps music wasn't a waste at all. But the mystery only grows, because this wasn't happening in just one place. Every known human culture has created music. The instruments are different. The melodies are different. The languages are different. Everything changes, except music. Think about how extraordinary that really is. Humans disagree about almost everything. Languages, religions, clothing, food, governments, yet somehow every civilization eventually began singing. Why? That question has puzzled people for centuries. Was music entertainment, communication, something spiritual, or was it doing a job so important that every human society rediscovered it again and again? The deeper you think about it, the stranger the mystery becomes. Maybe music wasn't simply invented. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe somewhere deep inside the human brain. There has always been something waiting for music to appear. To uncover that story, we have to travel back tens of thousands of years, to a time before cities, before writing, before kingdoms, before history itself. Humans had almost nothing, but they already carried one mysterious sound, a sound that had been with every single one of us since before we were born. Imagine crawling through a cold, narrow cave. Your flashlight sweeps across ancient stone. At first, you see nothing, just dust, broken rock, silence. Then, buried beneath thousands of years of earth, you notice a small piece of carved bone. Strange, tiny holes run along its side, too symmetrical to be natural, too deliberate to be an accident. For a moment, nobody knows what they're looking at. A tool? A weapon? Part of an animal? Then someone notices something impossible to ignore. The holes aren't random. They're perfectly spaced. They're finger holes. Suddenly, everything changes. It isn't a weapon. It isn't a tool. It's a flute. And not just any flute. It's one of the oldest musical instruments ever discovered. Deep inside caves in what is now southern Germany, archaeologists uncovered delicate flutes carved from the hollow bones of birds and the ivory tusks of mammoths. These weren't random pieces of bone. They had carefully shaped mouthpieces, precisely placed finger holes. Every detail suggested intention. When researchers dated these flutes, the results were breathtaking. Some were around 40,000 years old. 40,000 years. Let that sink in. People were making music before cities, before writing, before history itself. That means humans were making musical instruments while woolly mammoths still roamed Europe, long before agriculture, long before the wheel, long before civilization as we know it. That discovery was extraordinary for another reason. Music doesn't fossilize. A melody disappears the moment it's played. Voices leave no footprints. Animal skin rots. Wood decays. Songs vanish. That's why, for centuries, scientists believed prehistoric music had disappeared forever. Your ancestors didn't wait until civilization became comfortable before creating music. They brought music with them into one of the harshest environments humans had ever faced. But here's the strange part. Making one of these flutes wasn't easy. Imagine taking the hollow wing bone of a large bird. Now, without modern tools or measuring equipment, you begin carving tiny finger holes. One wrong cut. The bone cracks. Hours of work disappear. You have to start again. Every minute spent carving was a minute not spent hunting. Not gathering food, not building shelter, survival had to wait. From an evolutionary perspective, that's an expensive investment, so why keep making them? And here's where the mystery grows even deeper. Some archaeologists believe these flutes weren't isolated inventions at all. They're simply the oldest instruments lucky enough to survive. If that's true, humans may have been singing, clapping, drumming on logs, or striking stones together for thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands, of years before the oldest flute was ever carved. In other words, the archaeological record may only be showing us the final chapter of a much older story. Imagine the fire burning low. Children sit close together. Someone taps two stones. Another joins the rhythm. A child joins the rhythm. An elder begins humming. Another voice answers. Soon, the entire camp is moving together. No stage, no audience, no written language, just people, making music beneath the stars, sharing something no other species ever would. We can't know whether a scene exactly like this ever happened, but anthropologists studying traditional societies have noticed something fascinating. Again and again, communal singing and rhythmic movement appear alongside storytelling, rituals, celebrations, and mourning. Perhaps music has always been woven into the moments that mattered most. Still, scientists must be careful. Archaeology tells us that instruments existed. It doesn't automatically tell us why they existed. Were they used for entertainment, religious ceremonies, teaching, courtship, group identity, communication? The artifacts themselves remain silent. And that's one of the greatest challenges in studying prehistoric music. The evidence answers one question, while creating 5 more. Yet one fact becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Across thousands of years and countless generations, humans kept making music again and again and again. If music were merely an accidental pastime, it's remarkably persistent. Most behaviors that provide no meaningful benefit tend to disappear. Music didn't. It spread across continents, survived ice ages, adapted to new cultures, and followed humanity into every corner of the planet. The caves answered one mystery. They showed us when humans were making music, but they couldn't answer why. Why would evolution preserve something that seems so unnecessary? To answer that, we have to stop looking inside caves and start asking a much bigger question. Because if music truly had no purpose, evolution should have erased it long ago. At first glance, music looks like one of evolution's biggest mistakes. Imagine you're designing a species from scratch. Your creatures need food, water, shelter, and protection from predators. Every trait costs energy. Bigger brains require more calories. Stronger muscles demand more food. Even growing hair comes with biological expenses. Evolution is like an incredibly strict accountant. If something costs more than it gives back, sooner or later, it usually disappears. So where does music fit into that equation? It doesn't help you run faster. It won't make your eyesight sharper. A melody can't stop a lion. A catchy rhythm won't keep you warm during an ice age winter. By all appearances, music seems like an expensive luxury, which creates an uncomfortable question. Why didn't evolution get rid of it? For a long time, some scientists argued that maybe it should have. One of the most famous ideas came from evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, who suggested that music might be a byproduct rather than an adaptation. In this view, our brains evolved for language, planning, memory, and social intelligence, and music simply emerged as an unintended consequence, almost like a pleasant side effect. Think of it like cheesecake. Humans didn't evolve specifically to eat cheesecake. We evolved to enjoy sugar and fat because they were valuable sources of energy. Cheesecake simply combines those ancient preferences into something our brains find irresistible. Perhaps music works the same way. Maybe evolution never designed us for music at all. Maybe our powerful brains accidentally stumbled into it. It's an elegant idea. If music were merely a happy accident, why is it so universal? Why does every known culture develop it? Why do children naturally respond to rhythm? Why do people spend thousands of hours creating, practicing, and sharing music? And why does nearly every society weave music into its most important moments? Birth, marriage, celebration, war, grief, religion. If music were nothing more than evolutionary wallpaper, it has become remarkably difficult to remove. That's why many researchers began exploring a different possibility. What if music actually helped our ancestors survive, not by making individuals stronger, but by making groups stronger? Imagine an ice age hunt. A massive mammoth crashes into the snow. No single human could have brought it down alone. One hunter distracted the animal. Others closed in from different directions. Some carried the enormous cuts of meat back to camp. Children gathered firewood. Elders remembered where the herd usually returned each season. Nobody survived alone. Survival was a group achievement, which raises a fascinating possibility. What if music helped create groups that worked better together? Now imagine 2 prehistoric communities living side by side. Both are equally intelligent. Both have similar tools. Both hunt the same animals. But one group regularly sings together, moves together, and shares rhythmic rituals around the fire. The other doesn't. At first, the difference seems meaningless, but over months and years, something subtle begins to happen. The singing group becomes better at coordinating. People learn to anticipate each other's actions. Children absorb traditions more easily. Trust grows stronger. Conflicts become easier to resolve because individuals feel like they belong to something larger than themselves. Eventually, these small advantages begin to add up, not because music makes someone a better hunter, but because it helps create a better hunting team. Modern psychology offers intriguing support for this idea. Experiments have repeatedly shown that when people sing, clap, or move in rhythm together, they often become more cooperative afterward. Strangers are more willing to trust each other. Teams synchronize their actions more effectively. Even simple rhythmic activities can strengthen feelings of belonging. It's almost as if rhythm acts like invisible social glue. Of course, we have to be careful. These experiments involve modern humans living in modern societies. They don't prove that music evolved for cooperation tens of thousands of years ago, but they do show that shared rhythm has measurable effects on human behavior today, effects that could have been useful in the distant past. And cooperation may have been humanity's greatest superpower. Compared with many predators, early humans weren't especially fast. They weren't especially strong. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. What they did have was an extraordinary ability to work together, building shelters, sharing knowledge, planning hunts, protecting children, passing stories from one generation to the next. Perhaps music wasn't competing with survival. Perhaps it was quietly helping survival happen. Still, another mystery refuses to disappear. If rhythm and coordinated sound can strengthen social bonds, why don't all highly social animals create music like humans do? Wolves cooperate, dolphins cooperate, elephants cooperate. Many birds produce astonishingly complex songs. Yet none of them compose symphonies, invent thousands of musical traditions, or teach entirely new songs across generations with the creativity humans display. Somewhere along the evolutionary path, our species took a dramatically different turn. Whatever happened, it wasn't just about cooperation. It was also about imagination, learning, culture, and perhaps something happening inside the human brain that no other species developed to the same degree. Because whatever evolution did, it didn't simply change our voices, it changed the brain listening to them. And that's where this story takes an unexpected turn. Because the greatest musical instrument ever created isn't made from wood or bone or strings. It's the 3 pounds of tissue sitting inside your skull. If music really helped humans survive, the strongest evidence might not be buried in an ancient cave. It might be sitting inside your skull. Right now, your brain is performing one of the most complicated tasks in nature. It controls your heartbeat, processes millions of visual signals every second, predicts danger, remembers faces, and somehow allows you to understand every word you're hearing. It's incredibly efficient. So here's a strange question. Why would this incredibly busy organ dedicate so much of its precious processing power to something as seemingly unnecessary as music? Scientists have spent decades trying to answer that question, and the deeper they looked, the stranger the answer became. Imagine you're listening to your favorite song. It feels effortless. You simply press play. But inside your brain, it's anything but simple. Different regions suddenly spring into action almost simultaneously. One area recognizes rhythm. Another predicts the next note before it arrives. Another connects the melody to memories from years ago. Another generates emotions. Yet another coordinates tiny movements, making your foot tap almost without permission. It's less like flipping on a single light switch and more like watching an entire city come alive at night. No single music center exists in your brain. Music recruits an entire network. It's one of the few experiences capable of activating systems responsible for hearing, movement, memory, attention, prediction, and emotion all at once. That alone is remarkable. But then scientists noticed something even more surprising. Your brain doesn't just listen to music. It tries to predict it. Imagine someone begins singing a familiar melody, happy birthday to. Even if they suddenly stop, your brain almost automatically finishes the next words. Not because you're consciously trying to, because your brain is constantly making predictions. In many ways, listening to music is like solving a puzzle that keeps rewarding you for guessing correctly. Every beat creates an expectation. Every melody builds anticipation. Every unexpected chord creates surprise. And when those predictions are balanced just right, not too obvious, not too random, your brain rewards you with a small burst of pleasure. Think of it like a skilled storyteller. If every plot twist were obvious, you'd get bored. If every twist made no sense, you'd become confused. The best stories live somewhere in the middle. Music follows the same principle. It dances between expectation and surprise. Perhaps that's why the same song can remain enjoyable even after hearing it dozens of times. Your brain isn't passively receiving sound, it's actively playing along. But here's where things become almost unbelievable. Music doesn't only change how you think, it changes how you remember. Have you ever heard a song you hadn't listened to in years and suddenly found found yourself transported back to a specific moment? Maybe you're sitting in the back seat of your parents' car. Maybe you're walking through your old school hallway. Maybe it's the soundtrack from your first vacation, your first heartbreak, or your graduation day. The memory arrives so vividly that it almost feels like time travel. A single melody unlocks an entire chapter of your life. Scientists believe this happens because music becomes tightly connected with the brain systems that process emotion and memory. Instead of storing isolated facts, your brain often stores experiences as complete packages. The sounds, the feelings, the surroundings, the people pull on one thread, and the entire memory begins to unravel. Perhaps the most moving evidence comes from patients living with Alzheimer's disease. Some can no longer recognize close family members. Conversations become confusing. Names disappear. Entire decades seem lost. Yet, when caregivers play songs from their youth, something extraordinary sometimes happens. They begin singing. Faces brighten. Forgotten lyrics return. Memories briefly emerge from behind the fog of disease. It's not magic. And it doesn't happen for everyone, but it reminds us just how deeply music can become woven into the architecture of the human mind. That's difficult to dismiss as a meaningless accident. Then there's another mystery almost everyone has experienced: goosebumps. You're listening to a powerful piece of music. The chorus builds, the orchestra swells, or a single voice hits the perfect note. Suddenly, tiny hairs rise on your arms. A chill runs down your spine. Why? Researchers think these moments occur when music creates an especially powerful combination of prediction, surprise, and emotion. Your brain recognizes that something meaningful has just happened, even though no words were spoken. It's a purely emotional language, one that bypasses logic and speaks directly to feeling. And here's the truly astonishing part. Long before babies understand words, they respond to rhythm. Newborns can detect patterns. Infants often move instinctively when they hear steady beats. Parents across nearly every culture naturally sing to calm distressed children. No one teaches this. It appears almost instinctive. Some scientists believe these early interactions may offer clues to music's ancient origins. Others argue there's simply evidence that our brains are exceptionally flexible learners. Either way, the connection between music and the developing human brain runs astonishingly deep. By now, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Music isn't simply entering your ears. It's coordinating enormous parts of your mind. It influences movement, emotion, memory, prediction, learning, connection. Very few human experiences do all of that simultaneously. But even after everything we've learned, one enormous mystery remains unsolved. If our brains seem so naturally prepared for music, did music shape the human brain? Or did the evolving human brain accidentally create music? That question has divided scientists for decades, and answering it may require going back to something even older than songs themselves: language. Imagine trying to explain to someone that danger is coming without using a single word. No sentences, no grammar, no vocabulary, only your voice. Could you do it? Probably. You'd instinctively change your tone, speak faster, raise your volume, stretch certain sounds. Even without language, another person would immediately sense fear, urgency, or excitement. That's because long before words carry meaning, sound carries emotion. And that simple observation has led to one of the most fascinating debates in human evolution. What came first, language or music? At first, the answer seems obvious. Language built civilization. Language allowed humans to plan, teach, negotiate, and record knowledge. Surely music came afterward, but some scientists aren't convinced. They argue that our distant ancestors may have communicated emotionally through rhythm, melody, and vocal patterns long before complex language evolved. Imagine standing around an ancient campfire nearly 100,000 years ago. Your vocabulary is tiny. You can't deliver long speeches. You can't explain complicated ideas, yet your group still needs to stay together. Comfort frightened children. Warn of danger. Celebrate successful hunts. Strengthen friendships. Express grief when someone dies. Emotion may have been humanity's first universal language, and music, if it already existed in some early form, could have amplified those emotions. Think about how you instinctively speak to a baby. Almost no parent uses their normal voice. Instead, they naturally exaggerate their pitch, stretch their words, repeat rhythmic sounds, and sing. It happens across cultures, even when parents don't realize they're doing it. Researchers call this infant-directed speech, and while it isn't exactly music, it shares many musical qualities: rhythm, melody, repetition, emotion. Some scientists believe this offers a glimpse into our evolutionary past. Perhaps our ancestors discovered that musical vocal patterns were especially effective at building emotional connections before language became sophisticated. It's an intriguing hypothesis, but it's important to remember, it's still a hypothesis. No one can travel back in time to record the first human conversations. Instead, researchers must combine evidence from archaeology, linguistics, neuroscience, developmental psychology, and anthropology to piece together the puzzle. Each discipline contributes another fragment. fragment. None provides the entire picture. Yet regardless of whether music came before language, after language, or evolved alongside it, one fact is difficult to ignore. Once humans developed complex societies, music was everywhere, not occasionally, everywhere. Walk through almost any civilization in history, and you'll find music woven into its most important moments. People sang while harvesting crops. They marched into battle behind drums. They celebrated victories with dancing. They mourned their dead through songs. Priests chanted during sacred rituals. Parents rocked babies to sleep with lullabies. Teachers used rhythm to help students remember stories before books became common. Music wasn't an extra decoration added to civilization. It became one of civilization's operating systems. And perhaps that's because music solves a problem words alone cannot. Imagine standing in a stadium with 50,000 strangers. Someone begins singing a familiar song. Within seconds, thousands of completely unrelated people are singing together. Their breathing synchronizes. Their voices merge. For a brief moment, individuals become something larger than themselves. That's an extraordinary ability. Words can communicate information. Music can create shared emotion. Anthropologists have long noticed that nearly every society develops rituals involving synchronized movement and sound. Whether it's chanting, drumming, dancing, or singing, these activities often strengthen group identity. Modern psychology supports this observation. Studies suggest that moving or singing together can increase feelings of trust, cooperation, and belonging. Again, these studies don't prove that's why music evolved, but they demonstrate that music continues to influence human relationships in measurable ways today. Perhaps our ancestors experienced similar effects. If so, music may have quietly strengthened communities generation after generation, not by making one individual stronger, but by making entire groups more resilient. And that may explain something else. Humans don't inherit specific songs through their genes. A baby isn't born already knowing a lullaby. Every generation teaches the next. Songs become living libraries. They preserve stories, traditions, values, beliefs, history. Long before writing, music may have helped knowledge survive. A melody is easier to remember than a paragraph. A rhythm is easier to repeat than a list of facts. Even today, many people can recall songs they haven't heard in decades. Try remembering the alphabet. Chances are, you're not reciting 26 separate letters. You're probably hearing a tune. That's the hidden genius of music. It transforms information into experience. It turns memory into emotion. It turns strangers into communities. And over thousands of generations, those small advantages may have shaped something much larger. Not just better singers, not just better musicians, better societies. But even after all of this, one final mystery remains. If music helped strengthen families, build communities, preserve knowledge, and shape civilizations, then perhaps we've been asking the wrong question from the very beginning. Maybe humans didn't invent music. Maybe music helped invent humanity, and that changes everything. Let's go back to the question that started this journey. Why did humans invent music? After thousands of years of philosophy, archaeology, psychology, neuroscience, and evolutionary research, you might expect a simple answer, but science doesn't give us one. Instead, it gives us something far more interesting. The question itself may be wrong. Think about another human invention, the wheel. One person, or at least one community, almost certainly invented it. There was a moment before the wheel existed and a moment after, but music doesn't fit that pattern. There was probably never a single inventor. No prehistoric genius suddenly announced, "I've created music." Instead, music appears to have emerged gradually, almost invisibly, over tens of thousands of years. A rhythmic clap became a shared ritual. A comforting melody soothed a frightened child. A steady beat helped hunters move together. A memorable song preserved an important story. Generation after generation, these behaviors evolved, spread, changed, and became deeply woven into human life. Not because someone planned it, but because they worked. Perhaps that's why music feels so natural. You don't need to teach a child that rhythm is enjoyable. You don't need to convince people to dance when the right beat begins. Across cultures separated by oceans, languages, and thousands of years of history, humans independently discovered the same remarkable idea. Life becomes richer when sound becomes music, and maybe that's the biggest clue of all. Throughout this documentary, we've uncovered pieces of an enormous puzzle. Archaeology showed us that humans were making sophisticated instruments at least 40,000 years ago. Evolution suggested that behaviors this widespread rarely survive without offering some kind of advantage. Neuroscience revealed that music activates an extraordinary network of brain systems responsible for memory, movement, prediction, and emotion. Psychology demonstrated that shared rhythm can strengthen cooperation and social connection. Anthropology reminded us that every known culture surrounds its most meaningful moments with music. None of these discoveries alone explains music, but together they tell a remarkable story. Not the story of a single invention, the story of a relationship between the human brain, human society, and sound itself. Perhaps music didn't evolve for one reason. Perhaps it survived because it solved many many different problems at once. It could comfort before there were therapists, teach before there were schools, unite before there were nations, preserve memories before there were books, strengthen trust before there were laws. No single theory explains every piece of the puzzle, and perhaps none ever will. But sometimes, understanding doesn't come from finding one perfect answer. It comes from seeing how all the pieces fit together. Right now, somewhere on Earth, a mother is quietly singing a lullaby to her newborn. A teenager is discovering a song that will forever remind them of this moment in their life. A choir is performing in an ancient cathedral. A drummer is keeping perfect rhythm with musicians they've never met before. A patient living with memory loss is recognizing a melody that unlocks a forgotten part of their past. None of these people are thinking about evolution or archaeology or neuroscience. They're simply experiencing something profoundly human. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson music has to teach us. It reminds us that being human isn't only about intelligence, it's about connection. Connection to each other, connection to our past, connection to our emotions, connection to stories that began long before any of us were born. 40,000 years ago, someone sat beside a fire, surrounded by darkness, and turned silence into song. They could never have imagined concert halls, headphones, streaming services, or orchestras, yet every melody we hear today is still connected to that same ancient impulse, thousands of generations later. Someone else will do exactly the same thing. Maybe it's you, because long before music became the soundtrack of civilization, it was quietly writing the story of humanity itself.